John Michael Ozzy Osbourne was born on December 3, 1948, in the industrial district of Aston, Birmingham. He grew up in a cramped working-class household with 6 siblings, surrounded by factories, metalworks, and the cold gray walls of post-war Britain. His childhood was defined by poverty, learning difficulties including undiagnosed dyslexia, and a sense of being out of place. Yet inside him burned a spark that refused to be crushed by circumstance. That spark would eventually ignite a musical revolution. Ozzy left school at 15, working a series of rough manual jobs, ranging from construction labor to slaughterhouse assistant. Nothing fit him. The world seemed too small for his restless mind, until he discovered music. In the late 1960s, fate placed him alongside Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward. Together, these 4 young men from the grimy outskirts of Birmingham created something no one had ever heard before: a dark, heavy, doom-laden sound that captured the anxiety, anger, and disillusionment of an entire generation growing up in the shadows of post-industrial England. In 1968, they formed Black Sabbath. Their music, distorted, ominous, unashamedly intense, became the blueprint for heavy metal. Ozzy's voice, haunting and unpolished, floated over grinding riffs like a warning from another world. Albums such as Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and Master Reality did more than break new ground. They carved out an entire genre. For the first time, darkness became art, and Ozzy became its prophet. But rock stardom came with chaos. By the end of the 1970s, personal conflicts, substance struggles, and industry pressure led to Ozzy's exit from Black Sabbath. It could have been the end, but instead, it became the beginning of his second life. In 1980, he released Blizzard of Oz, one of the greatest solo metal albums ever recorded. Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, Goodbye to Romance, and later songs like No More Tears and Mama, I'm Coming Home transformed him from band frontman into a mortal icon. Then came an unexpected 3rd chapter. In the early 2000s, the Osbournes premiered on television, turning Ozzy into a household figure far beyond metal. Millions who had never listened to Black Sabbath now knew Ozzy as the stumbling, mumbling, soft-hearted dad who navigated daily family chaos with a mixture of confusion and love. The show pioneered modern reality TV, and Ozzy, the Prince of Darkness, became a cultural phenomenon all over again, proving that even the wildest legends can evolve. Few artists in history have carried 3 legacies at once: founder of a genre, global solo superstar, and reality TV icon. Ozzy Osbourne did all 3. Despite his extraordinary career, Ozzy's body carried the scars of decades of hard living, high-risk touring, and past accidents. Years of performing took a toll on his spine, his joints, his nerves, and especially his balance. But everything became dramatically worse in 2019, when Ozzy suffered a severe fall in his home. The incident aggravated old injuries from a near-fatal quad bike crash years earlier, damaging metal rods and requiring major surgery. From that point forward, the decline began. Ozzy described that period as the worst misery of my life. The surgeries were complicated. Recovery was long. Pain was constant. At times, he could barely walk. Rehabilitation became a daily battle. Yet he kept fighting, even as movement grew more difficult with each passing month. Then, in early 2020, Ozzy announced publicly that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. It was a form that affected his autonomic nervous system, the invisible network that controls heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and the body's unconscious functions. With Parkinson's came tremors, stiffness, sudden drops in blood pressure, and severe instability. He tried to continue touring, postponing shows rather than canceling them outright, hoping he would eventually recover enough to return to the stage. But as the years passed, the brutal truth unfolded. Parkinson's does not wait, does not pause, and does not negotiate. By his mid-70s, Ozzy struggled to walk even short distances without support. His voice remained powerful, but his body could no longer carry it the way it once had. Still, the fire inside him never dimmed. Even in interviews where he admitted he could barely stand, he insisted that all he wanted was one last performance. Not a world tour, not a multi-city run, just one final moment with the fans who had carried him for half a century. One final night in the city that made him who he was. And that wish would lead to one of the most emotional concerts in rock history. On July 5th, 2025, Villa Park in Birmingham became the center of the music world. More than 40,000 fans filled the stadium. Millions more watched online. The air buzzed with the electricity of an event that everyone knew was historically significant. Ozzy was too weak to stand for long, but he was determined to sing. A large black, throne-like chair was placed at center stage, a symbol of both his limitations and his courage. When Ozzy was guided onto the stage, the crowd roared so loudly the stadium shook. His movements were slow, his body fragile, but his face carried a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and gratitude. The moment he took his seat, many fans cried, not out of sadness, but because they were witnessing a man who refused to let illness silence him. Then the music began. Ozzy's solo set featured I Don't Know, Mr. Crowley, Suicide Solution, Mama, I'm Coming Home, and Crazy Train. And it is important to clarify, Crazy Train was not the opening song of the night, as some early fan retellings mistakenly suggested. It arrived near the end, becoming the emotional explosion everyone had been waiting for. When he sang, Mama, I'm Coming Home, voices across the stadium cracked as fans realized the irony and poignancy of the moment. But the true climax arrived when Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward stepped onto the stage to reunite Black Sabbath one final time. The crowd erupted not just from excitement, but from reverence. For men who created a genre together, were sharing the stage again, likely for the last time in their lives. They performed War Pigs, NIB, Iron Man, and finally Paranoid. During Paranoid, Ozzy sang the haunting line, I tell you to enjoy life, I wish I could, but it's too late. The lyric had existed for decades, but that night it felt prophetic, chilling, and painfully intimate. It echoed across the stadium with the weight of goodbye. When the performance ended, Ozzy looked out across a sea of faces, many crying, many screaming his name, and said the final words he would ever speak on stage. I love you all. 17 days later, he was gone. On the morning of July 22nd, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne died at his home in Buckinghamshire. He was 76 years old. The family statement was simple and heartbreaking. He passed peacefully, surrounded by loved ones. Details were scarce, and the family chose to keep his final minutes private, but the official death certificate provided clarity. It confirmed that Ozzy suffered an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack, which led to out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. His long-standing coronary artery disease, combined with Parkinson's-related autonomic dysfunction, contributed to the failure of his heart. There is no mention of frantic emergency scenes, no dramatic medical intervention, no hospital rush. What is known is that he died at home, in familiar surroundings, with the people he loved by his side. For a man whose life had been defined by chaos, controversy, and adrenaline, the quietness of his passing was almost poetic. The world learned of his death with shock. How could someone so loud, so intense, so alive simply vanish 17 days after saying goodbye on stage? But the duality had always been part of Ozzy's story. Behind the persona of the Prince of Darkness was a man who spent his last years fighting physical pain, clinging to life through sheer willpower. And so, the final chapter closed not on stage, not in the middle of a show, not in a blaze of rock and roll excess, but in the calm embrace of home. On July 30th, Birmingham came to a standstill. Tens of thousands filled the streets for the public procession honoring Ozzy Osbourne. It was not simply a funeral. It was a historic farewell to the city's greatest cultural icon. The cortege began at Villa Park, where he had performed for the final time just weeks earlier. It then traveled through Aston, past the house where Ozzy grew up. and across the Black Sabbath Bridge, a symbol of the band's legacy. People lined sidewalks holding vinyl records, posters, flowers, and childhood photos taken with Ozzy decades earlier. Many wore vintage shirts from tours dating back to the 1970s and 80s. Others simply stood silently, tears streaming down their faces. Bands of local musicians played Sabbath riffs softly as the cortege passed. Some fans threw roses onto the street. Others whispered, "Thank you, Ozzy." For many, this was not just the funeral of a musician. It was the goodbye of a hero who represented the struggles and resilience of Birmingham's working class. After the public procession, a private ceremony was held in Buckinghamshire. Away from cameras, his family laid him to rest. Even in death, Ozzy remained both a public phenomenon and a deeply private man. Ozzy Osbourne's legacy transcends the boundaries of music, television, and culture. He did not merely contribute to heavy metal, he helped create it. His voice shaped the identity of a genre that would influence millions of people across generations and continents. His stage presence, both chaotic and captivating, redefined what it meant to be a rock frontman. His songwriting expressed fear, alienation, anger, and longing in ways that resonated deeply with the disillusioned and the misunderstood. As a solo artist, he produced some of the most enduring anthems in rock history. Songs that continue to dominate arenas, sporting events, movies, and streaming platforms. His collaboration with guitar prodigies like Randy Rhoads and Zakk Wylde produced groundbreaking music that remains revered decades later. Beyond music, Ozzy's cultural impact expanded through The Osbournes, which reshaped television and introduced him to a generation that knew little about heavy metal. He became the rare figure who could terrify parents in the 1970s, inspire musicians in the 1980s and 90s, and make families laugh in the 2000s. But his deepest legacy lies not in awards or sales, but in the courage he embodied. Ozzy was imperfect, vulnerable, flawed, damaged, yet he kept rising. He survived addiction, accidents, inner turmoil, and countless personal tragedies. And even when Parkinson's tried to silence him, he insisted on singing one last time. His life stands as proof that art is not created by the strongest bodies, but by the strongest spirits. Ozzy Osbourne will forever be remembered as a pioneer, a rebel, a survivor, and above all, a man whose music transformed the world. The final image of Ozzy Osbourne is not one of chaos, wildness, or controversy. It is not the man biting a bat on stage, nor the stumbling father on reality TV, nor the young rebel screaming into cheap microphones in Birmingham pubs. The image the world chose to keep is far more meaningful, an aging legend, sitting proudly in a black throne at Villa Park, trembling slightly, but still willing to give everything he had left. When Ozzy lifted the microphone and said, "I love you all," it was more than a goodbye. It was a full circle moment in a life that defied every expectation. The boy who once felt useless and forgotten became a global icon whose influence will echo for centuries. He sang that night, not as the Prince of Darkness, but as a man facing the end. With dignity, love, and gratitude. His heart stopped on July 22nd, but the roar he created will never fade. Every time a guitar riff thunders, every time a crowd shouts a metal anthem, every time a young artist chooses to be unapologetically themselves, Ozzy lives again. He is gone from this world, but his voice remains. He is silent, but his spirit is louder than ever. And in every corner of the earth where metal fans raise their hands in the sign he made famous, one truth rings out. Ozzy Osbourne will never die.